Okay, I'm going to make this review very short and very simple because, frankly, this is one of those books that is very hard to review. It is the book called The White Hotel. It was written by D.M. Tomas. It was published in 1981 through Viking Publishing. I don't know if Viking Publishing is still around. I do know the book is still in print. It is both. You can get it pretty much in hardcover or in softcover at your local bookstore or Amazon.com. One of the reasons why this book is very hard to read is because a lot of stuff that is in the book is very genuine, very unique. It is something that you really have to read for yourself to fully understand the content of this book. I, for one, when I got the book, I got one of the older versions of this book. It doesn't really matter, it's just best to have a different cover. And how this book attracted me, because I'm more of a fantasy guy. I like reading fantasy. I like reading, something. I do tend to read now and then crime novels like James Patterson or something that's a documentary that really caught my attention. But for this book caught my attention from the cover. The jacket was very different than I have ever used to seeing. And one of the things that I've noticed about the jacket was that you had this woman sitting naked in a rocking chair, and you had like 4 walls surrounding her. They had windows with no drapes or anything and you had like a background of for appears to be clear blue skies. One of the things I also noticed about this book that also grabbed my attention was her hair was on fire. So right there, that alone, okay, this must be a fantasy book. But as I stared at this and I saw the D.M. Tomas, my thought of being fantasy pretty much was in question. I didn't know if this was I didn't read the synopsis, by the way. I didn't know what I was reading. It was going to be a fantasy novel or a historical novel or a romance novels. And I went into this blindly. So I read this book not knowing what the characters were, what this was all about. I just basically read. And I'm glad I did, because if I would have got a hint that there was anything else besides what I was reading, I probably would never have read it. But because I didn't look in the synopsis and because the picture really didn't give me a clearer vision of what I was getting into, it really drove my attention that it didn't. So I went in there and I read it. Let me tell you right now, besides the prologue, this book is well written. It is absolutely a masterpiece. But it all depends on your taste of reading. I'm going to let you guys know right now. If you guys have a very strong religious belief on how literature should be written, if you guys get offended on anything that is sexually oriented, especially considered obscene literature, if you get offended on how these characters are portrayed, especially how they are being described, then this book is probably not for you. This book really does border on fantasy and reality. It really doesn't hold back too much on what it's trying to say. Now, let me tell you, when you read the prologue, it starts out as just simply like a letter. They're writing letters to each other. The characters in this book is basically exchanging letters, concerns. They bring up information about adultery. They bring up information about how much they're having a good time in the West. And the book pretty much goes as this chapter ends, because this chapter is actually semi-chapters. That's something I almost forgot to tell you. These chapters are pretty much chapters, but they're also chapters within itself. That's also, and there's a reason for that. I'm gonna get to that in a minute. But as you read The White Hotel, as you read that prologue, and I'm gonna tell you right now, that is the only boring thing in this whole entire book, is that letter scene, because it really drags the book right down to the point of saying, what is the point of all this? Why am I reading them exchanging letters? But that was the art of the author, and to be honest with you, that is probably the only uninteresting thing that you're ever going to read in this book, because once it gets to chapter 1, oh my God, things hit the fan. Now, chapter 1 starts off pretty much like this. there's a woman writing to a professor talking in details about the affair she's having with her son. It is batshit crazy what the stuff that she's telling this professor. I mean, details to what she's doing to him, what he's doing to her, how much she thinks she's pregnant, where she is. It just goes on. But what's more interesting about this is that when you're reading this stuff, strange things is happening around these two characters, to the point where you honestly don't know if this is real or fantasy. I'll go on and say it again. This is a book that really has no limits, and this is pretty much once you get there, you just glue, because as crazy as things are going on, you really want to know how it was happening, and you honestly didn't get a good feel of what was happening, because while they are intimate to each other, crazy things is happening, and it involves this white hotel. People was dying left and right. Bodies was being counted. There was a flood at one time where more bodies was being draped. It's like as they was embracing love and lust, death and destruction was happening outside of them. It's like their own world was like protecting them from all the death and destruction. As crazy as it may sound, like I said, you have to really read this to understand where I'm coming from, because this goes on for this chapter, and it's being told not by letters, but by her letter to the professor. It's not like a one-sided thing. The professor's not writing back. She's deliberately telling the professor through a letter-style writing what's going on. In the next chapter, this repeats itself, but only differently. Now you're getting the author being told about these two lovers. The woman is committing adultery. She is embarked on this man. We don't know who this guy is, but she is having an affair, a long affair, in the same hotel. And you honestly, if you thought the first chapter was bad, this chapter goes beyond that. She is doing a lot of sexual things for this guy. It's really, really graphic. It tends to slow down a little bit, but it picks right back up. You have the people who she just met. They're engaged in a sexual taboo as well. There is some crazy stuff going on, and as this thing is happening, people are dying outside the hotel. People dying inside the hotel. The woman that they had a threesome with, she ended up dying in this book. I mean, there is just so much stuff going on in this chapter alone, that you're wondering again, is this really happening, or is this something in their head? You don't know, because the way the author describes it is, although they are impassionately romantically involved with each other, there's still a hell of a lot of other stuff going on. There's this mention, this black cat. I don't know why that's been put in there, but it's definitely something that has been brought in reference in this whole thing. And this lasts a pretty good 40-50 pages, not including the last chapter I just talked about. But this whole thing is happening. The madness is going on, and the craziness is going on, and yet the author still managed to separate that to a large degree, where although there are madness and mayhem, it didn't take away from the fact that these guys are engaged in an affair, a very dangerous affair by me, because she is committing adultery. She's cheating on her husband. The next chapter continues that, but now, and this is something that you begin to realize right away when you read this. This chapter begins to talk about a woman who later on was revealed as the daughter of the adulterer. And this is being explained that she is not well. She's having problems with her breast, where eventually it was pretty much removed. She's not into a very big relationship, and it's being told not by her. It's being told by by a doctor, psychiatrist, and they are communicating there. He's trying to help her, but he doesn't know how to help her in some ways, and he's realizing that the stuff that she's going through may have been linked to the stuff that's happened in the past. He later convinced her to try and move on and try to have a healthy relationship, even though he doubts that's going to happen, especially with the stuff that's going on here, especially with the way she's betrayed. She's not. She admitted to having a homosexuality affair with one of her friends. There's a lot of stuff to be talked about this book, about that chapter, but it's really, really unique because it's the insanity that happened in the other chapter that I talk about. It's not really in this one. It actually slows down and becomes a totally different story. Was all to itself. Also, in the next chapter, it's more like the author is pretty much taking control of it now. We find out that she's involved with a guy, that he has a son. They become married. They have an intimate relationship, but it's more tame. Right up to the point where we now reach the Nazi Germany. And that's when things started going crazy. I'm not going to get too deep into it, but let me tell you something. The last few chapters of that alone is just heart-wrenching. The stuff that goes on in that and the way that it's described is just... it's not for the weak of heart, I can tell you right now. There's a lot of stuff that happens there. And then, strangely enough, that's not even the last chapter. There's another chapter behind that, and you don't know whether they're dead or not, but let's just say that because the mother did die. Apparently, there was a fire in the White Hotel, and that she didn't make it, and her lover didn't make it. And apparently, she's talking to her mother, and she's explaining why she did what she did. It is not like one of those mean talks, and I'm getting a hint that they didn't make it, but it really doesn't really explain that they didn't make it. You only can draw a conclusion that this may be happening. Now, the reason why I'm saying you don't know, because according to what I read up on this book, after I read the book, it was basically a cross between fantasy and reality. The fantasy was, I think, the affair, the lust that was going on. And the reality was the cold, terrible tragedy that was surrounding them. If that is true, I think the author did a great job because he succeeded. Like I said, if I didn't sound like I gave you too much detail in this book, I do apologize. But yeah, honestly, guys, without spoiling anything, you really have to read this book to get a full understanding. It's just one of those books that even the most toughest reviewers is going to have a hard time explaining. It's one of those kind of books, and it's not a bad book. I'm not like no, it is a very good book, but you have to be really open-minded about this book. You just can't go in this book